Hello once again to another My Life in Film. The year is 1986 and it's another one packed full of films of note. Okay, 1986, let's get straight to it. So as you can see to the side, the US top 10 box office for that year saw Top Gun take the top spot, Crocodile Dundee in second place, Platoon took us to war in third place, Karate Kid Part 2, Star Trek The Voyage Home, Back to School, a film that I'd never even heard about until I looked at this list, Aliens, The Golden Child, Ruthless People and Ferris Bueller's Day Off rounding it all up. This was the year that Pixar was founded. Yes, the animation studio that has, well, you might have heard of one or two of their films over the years. Started off in this year. This was also the year that Timothy Dalton replaced, well, he was announced as replacing Roger Moore for the next James Bond film. Moore, having previously, in the previous year, decided to step away because, let's be honest, it was about time. And the TV show Siskel and Ebert premiered in this year, which ran in various formats right up until 2010. So that was quite a long stint, and yeah, the Siskel and Ebert have become known as the cinema critics of all cinema critics. In the Oscars that year, Platoon and Hannah and Her Sisters dominated the awards. So let's start off the rounding up of the films that came out this year. So there's been a common theme over the past few years. There's been a lot of Jackie Chan films, and this year is no different as we get Armour of God. Now, this is the film that was notorious because this was the one in which a stunt in the early part of the film, in fact it's in the intro segment, saw Chan fall and crack his head on a rock, which resulted in having a permanent hole in his head that he's got a plastic cap over. This stunt was, yeah, he should have been dead, let's be honest, but there's been many times that Chan should have been dead. It resulted, after the stunt went wrong, in the replacement of the director, with Chan himself taking over for the rest of the film so he could coordinate all the stunts and all the effects to his safety standards. He didn't want to put his life further at risk after spending a few months in hospital recovering from a cracked skull. The film itself is a cracking adventure. It's Jackie Chan does Indiana Jones. He plays a guy named Asian Hawk, a treasure hunter, who a friend's lover gets kidnapped, and he sets off to try and find her and defeat the cult that have kidnapped her. Marvellous stuff. Thoroughly recommended. Absolutely enjoyable. And like I say, that stunt that went wrong, which you get to see what went wrong in the end sequence. This is one thing about Jackie Chan films that I always loved, is all the outtakes at the end would be, there'd be some comical ones in there where like things just went slightly wrong and joking effects, but there'd also be the serious stunts that went terribly wrong. You would get to see what actually happened, and in this one you actually see him fall, hit, and you see him getting carried away on a stretcher. It shows the impact of, you know, every stunt that you put into it. Gotta love early Chan. Maybe not the more recent Chan. We'll get to that when he moves to Hollywood in a few years. Another film of note from this year was Betty Blue. Now, pretty much every student house across the UK throughout the 90s had at least one person within the household buy this poster. I can't think why. It was usually guys who bought this poster, I don't know why. This is a French erotic psychological drama, and you've got the beautiful Beatrice Dalle as Betty, and she obviously drew in the initial fascination. But the film, over the years, from me initially watching it and going, hey, oh, hey, boobies, to actually watching through the whole film and then revisiting it, it's in my top tier of listed films of all time, because it's the exploration of mental illness and depression and obsession conveyed within the story that really hammer home. It's a marvellous film. It's a beautifully shot film, and I'm going to go and revisit it within the next couple of days, I reckon, because going through the list for this year has reminded me of quite a few films that I want to go back to. One film that I'm going to be going back to soon, simply because there's a sequel on the way, is Top Gun. Tom Cruise, Tony Scott, homoeroticism abounds. This kick-started a teenage obsession with fighter jets. Now, I didn't particularly love the film, but I loved the planes. Oh, the combat sequences and everything with the fighter jets just drew me in, and the obsession that it gave me with combat jets resulted in me spending a lot of time and a lot of money on various flight combat simulator games on various systems throughout the years, especially when it came to the Atari ST years and I started getting F-19 and F-32 and things like that. Ooh, I love fighter jet control kind of games. The Top Gun tie-in game, not that good. Not that good. Might do it as one of the other videos just to show how not good it is. Blue Velvet came out this year, and this was the film that cemented the appeal of David Lynch for me. It's a film that I've not actually revisited since I was about 20, so there's quite a lot of gaps in my memory of the film, but there's the impact of the film on my memory. And this is the film in which Lynch really showcased all his dark noir, psycho thriller, symbolism and metaphor kind of approach. Kyle MacLachlan and Dennis Hopper both excel. Kyle MacLachlan would go on to feature prominently in an upcoming David Lynch production a few years later. Colour of Money came out this year. Now, I won't dwell on this film because it's only in recent months that I got around to finally watching this. But, you know, Tom Cruise was definitely becoming prominent on filming this year, and pairing him up with someone like Paul Newman, who basically you can look at Paul Newman as the Tom Cruise of the previous generation. He's that same kind of style of approach, charisma on screen, and having them paired up was an absolute stroke of genius for Scorsese. Sad that I only got around to watching it this year, and so I missed out on the impact of it on early Cruise. Who knows? FX Murder by Illusion. Now, this is a film, again, that I've not revisited for quite a while, but I did go through a few years of absolutely loving the FX films, and it's more because of the chemistry between the two leads, Brian Brown and Brian Dennehy. The film is a sci-fi thriller about an effects artist employed to fake a murder of someone who's going into witness protection, but things go wrong and complications arise. Ooh, tense thriller. Bit of fun, jokey at times, but it's the chemistry of those two that carries this otherwise average B-movie, which has A-list aims. It looks great. The effects technology aspect of it works well because the effects in it work well. Worth checking out. I will go back and revisit it and probably do an updated revision of it. One film that I don't need to go back and revisit, but no doubt I will, because it's a common one on the regular cycle of going back to, is Manhunter. Michael Mann adapts Thomas Harris's Red Dragon and delivers, in my eyes, the best Hannibal Lecter outing to date. I don't care much for the overblown theatrics of Anthony Hopkins. Now, I'm talking about big screen. I'm not gonna diss on that TV series because that TV series is amazing. This is about the big screen, and on the big screen, Brian Cox is the best Lecter for me. He's sinister and subtly intimidating and manipulative, and he's just creepy, and that's Lecter. You've also got William Peterson in here as Will Graham, and you've got the majestically placed Tom Noonan as Dollarhide. This is the film that put Mann on the map for me. I'd not really known that he was behind the TV series Miami Vice, which I was currently watching, but this was the film that made me notice him as a director. And this also introduced me to 17.5 minutes of musical madness known as In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by I Am Butterfly. Used brilliantly in this film, and has become a favourite 17.5 minute waste of my life on a regular occasion since. Brilliant track, check it out. Vietnam films were prominent during the 80s, and Platoon is perhaps the most iconic of them all. The horror of the war, the battle for the souls of soldiers, played as we follow Charlie Sheen's Chris, a raw recruit who's thrust into the middle of the war. It's got striking imagery, it's got symbolism, it's got the intense jungle setting. I've not revisited this for a couple of decades, and I do want to. I have got this actually on my short list of going back to watch, even though I've watched it before and I'm doing the Oscar revision things. This is one of the films that, even though I've watched it, I want to go back to see it. Brilliant film. My love of punk rock got to see an outing this year as Sid and Nancy was brought to the screen. Now, this was the biopic of the Sid Vicious and Nancy Spurgeon turbulent relationship, which has the tragic ending. As a fan of the Pistols, I was drawn to this film in my mid-teens, and this was the film that made me sit up and notice Gary Oldman, an actor who has stayed on my radar ever since and rarely lets me down. Even in bad films, Gary Oldman shines. He's one of those class acts and an absolute pride of this country that I live in. Stephen King adaptations came this year, and none are better in a lot of people's eyes than Stand By Me. It was an adaptation from The Body, from the Different Seasons short story compendium, and it's not a horror. And this coming-of-age drama, directed by Rob Reiner, is very beloved for many for very good reasons. River Phoenix, Will Wheaton, Corey Feldman, Jerry O'Connell, all entirely believable as a foursome of friends. And if you read like Will Wheaton's blogs from time to time when he touches on working on the film and his relationship with the other cast members, you get to know why it came across so natural, because they did bond as a gang of friends on set, which meant that the loss of River Phoenix was heartbreaking to the whole lot of them a few years later. Kiefer Sutherland as the gang leader, who's also trying to find the body before these small punks, is completely mesmerising. The whole film is a great little exploration of that coming of age, that growing up, that learning to understand the world around you, and all the cast are marvellous in it. This is a great one to revisit, and it is one that I go back to quite frequently. A film that I've not really got the love for that a lot of people have is Little Shop of Horrors. This musical adaptation of the musical version of the old Little Shop of Horror B movie. It's okay. And that's as much as I'm going to give it. It's okay. Rick Moranis, who is great. I won't diss on Rick Moranis. The guy is a legend. He fronts the film. However, it's just one moment in the film with Steve Martin and Bill Murray that steals the whole thing and almost makes the whole film worth watching. And that's all I can say about it. I've never really grasped onto the love that people have for it. The music's okay. It doesn't quite resonate with me. There's a lot better musicals out there. There's a lot better horror musicals out there. It's okay. Let's go on to sci-fi and fantasy, because I love to bulk all the sci-fi and fantasy together, because, hey, it's my bag, baby. Transformers the movie came out this year. Now, I was a huge Transformers fan. The TV series, the comic books, the toys. Oh, I loved them all. And so when Transformers the movie was announced, man, was I excited. Oh, I was going to finally see Optimus Prime and Megatron fighting on the big screen, and I did for the first about 10-15 minutes, and then tragedy struck. Yes, this film famously killed off a lot of the toys that were so beloved to a whole generation. It was a way of you could cynically say it was a way to bring a load of new toys to market. And it did so in the most harrowing manner by basically killing off all your old toys. The comics after the film then picked up the storylines and managed to find ways to bring all of the old characters back in some way or form. But dang, if this shock factor didn't hit hard. I had the comic book adaptation of this. I've got it on Blu-ray and absolutely love it, the anniversary edition. This is a film that I go back to quite frequently. I love the Transformers films, not the upcoming Transformers films. Just make that clear. I love the cartoons of Transformers. I love the animated series. I love the comic books. And this was also the film that was Orson Welles' last film before he passed away. He voiced Unicron, the planet killer. And, I mean, there's conflict of reports. There's a quote by him which basically is him saying that what I did this morning is I added a voice to a toy. And then there's reports from his agents and the people around him who said that when he when he got involved in it, he was really excited about the whole idea. He loved the idea of bringing his presence to a new generation. He thought that like the story was actually pretty monumental. What the truth is, we'll probably never know, the same way as we'll probably never know the full truth behind Mank. Anyway, moving on, there's a film that came out this year that proved that sometimes sequels should be allowed to happen. And sometimes a sequel can be almost as good, and in some people's opinions, better than the original. James Cameron took the ideas behind Alien and gave us Aliens. He brought Ripley back in what is a perfect sequel because it doesn't copy the first film, it doesn't tread on the toes of the first film, and it approaches the subject matter from a whole different perspective. It's a group of Marines sent to investigate what had actually happened to the colony that started setting up on the planet that the alien was found on. This is a brilliant film. This is well worth rewatching. And I know there's been a special edition, and I have this argument quite often with people who say that the special edition is better. I don't think the special edition is better. I feel that the original theatrical cut is tighter and it's got more pacing and momentum. I think the special edition slows things down too much, and it also includes the gun turrets sequence that you don't really see anything, so what's the point anyway? Although it just basically showcases the aliens as cannon fodder. They just keep throwing themselves at the guns until they run out of bullets, and that loses that intelligent design aspect that the first film had. I wouldn't say that the special edition is a bad film, but I'd say it knocks half a star off the rating. The rest of the film, marvellous. Michael Biehn, Bill Paxton, the whole cast, they're all great. They're all characters that within the first 15 minutes of meeting them, you grow to love them, and then you watch them get killed one by one, and it's heartbreaking. It's a cracking film, and again, one that I go back to quite frequently. Now, this year, I revisited all of the films in the next franchise, and I've ranked them all in order, and this is a film from the franchise that a lot of people love, and on the revisit, it's okay. It just doesn't quite hold up in this day and age. It's Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and this is very much a film of its time. The cast are clearly having fun. The whole time travel back to the 80s and how they try to integrate in 80s society and to hilarity. It does lend some humour, but it does leave it very dated. It's a film which you don't have to be a fan of Star Trek to watch and enjoy, but it is one that if you're a fan of Star Trek and you're a fan of these characters, you're more caught up in just their personalities more than anything else. It's fun, but it's not great, and on my revisits, this ranks lower than the 3 films that precede it. I know a lot of people say that this is better than Search for Spock. It's not, but it is better than what came next, and we'll get to that when that gets released. A film that was a huge disappointment for me when I watched it is Biggles, or Biggles Adventure in Time, to give it the full title. Now, I loved the Biggles books when I was a kid. I used to regularly get them from the library, work through them. So imagine my delight about when a film about my biplane flying hero was being made. This World War I flying ace, way! And then imagine my upset at the resulting mess. If you've not seen Biggles Adventure in Time, Biggles travels through time to the present day, and that's pretty much the point at which I realised this wasn't the Biggles film that I wanted. I wanted World War I flying ace. I didn't want helicopters and poor chase scenes, and the film is a shonky mess. There's a lot of films from this year that I enjoy, but I don't enjoy as much as other people. Some people hold some films on a pedestal, and Big Trouble in Little China is one of those films that people seem to think is like some kind of top tier best film ever made kind of approach, when all it really is just a fun little diversion. It's John Carpenter and Kurt Russell pairing up once more in this adventurous martial arts comedy. It's got some great designs in there. It's got like your lightning gods, which obviously inspired Mortal Kombat's Raiden. but I just don't think it holds up. Even when it came out, I watched it and I thought, that was fun. And then everyone else was like, oh, best film ever, oh, I love this film, oh, and I was just like, it was fun, I'll give you that. And I rewatched it last year, and it's fun, and that's it. But there's just this, it's like this and things like Golden Child. People have these strange memories that cloud their vision of what the actual film is, and it's good, but not great. However, on the flip side, I've got a film that I champion, regardless of what other people say, and that is Highlander. There can be only one. Sean Connery, Christopher Lambert, facing off against Clancy Brown as the Kurgan. This film is a beloved treasure of a film, and it's not a good film. I will clearly state that categorically now. If you watch it with a critical head on, you can rip this film apart, and I've done this many times. Me and one of my friends watched it a couple of times where we would just like point out all the mistakes and all the errors and all the continuity problems and every issue with the film while we're watching it, while still loving it. It's corny, it's cheesy, but it's fun, and I go back to this at least once a year, and I say at least because I've watched it twice this year. There can be only one, is what they said. Sadly, there was more. We'll get to them. And this was the year that technology was all the rage, when a robot, which gets struck by lightning, with military weapons on it, could have gone terribly wrong and on a rampage of destruction, but actually wanted to be more human. Yes, this is the year of Short Circuit and Number 5, or Johnny 5 as he would later become known as. A bit like, say, military robot struck by lightning, all the circuits go wrong, and it starts to get self-awareness, and it doesn't want to be at war. It wants to be peaceful. It wants to get to know people, and it's a charming, fun tale. The design of Johnny 5 is a great robot design, and it's the clear influence on some future designs of robots going forwards. Originally, this film was supposed to have been like a taut thriller with a military robot going on a rampage of destruction. Thankfully, they didn't go down that route, because there's plenty of other films that would have easily done that one. I think it works well because of the charm of it being about a military robot who doesn't want to be military. It did get a sequel. I didn't particularly like the sequel. I might talk about it on the year that the sequel got released. Then again, I might not, because I really didn't like it. Horror for this year. Now, we've already mentioned Stephen King with Stand By Me earlier on. This was also the year that Stephen King decided, hey, you know what? I don't just write great stories. I can direct one of my great stories. Let me see what I can do with Maximum Overdrive. Maximum Overdrive is an adaptation of Stephen King's Trucks short story, and it's brought to the screen by King himself, with an AC/DC soundtrack that ensures that this is a film that, no matter how bad it is, I revisit it every few years. It's not a good film by any stretch of the imagination, but it's become a secret pleasure of mine, and I like to embrace this film for all the wrong reasons. I also like to think that this is part of the Terminator series. Now, bear with me a second. Now, I know that this film came out before Terminator 2, that's a few years ahead, but I like to think that it was kind of like a retroactive prequel, in a way. Let me break it down. At the end of Terminator 2, they're at the foundry, smelting metal, and the T-1000 falls into it, dissolves into the metal. With me so far? Yeah? So that means that within all this molten metal, there's little molecules of the T-1000, this liquid intelligent metal. Now, I'm not saying that he was straight away going to rise back up with a huge amount of liquid. He was separated. Something with, there was no way he could link up again. Now, that liquid metal would then be used in manufacturing of various items, and we can imagine that over the years it got added into, like, circuit boards, car engines, etc, etc, etc. So many devices with just maybe one molecule, maybe two molecules, who knows? Small fragments of the T-1000. Now, the comet trail at the beginning of the film, which the Earth passed through, and for some reason ignited all the technology to rise up against mankind, it was never fully explained. Now it is. Because what it did, some radiation within that comet trail ignited the liquid metal memory within each of these components that the liquid metal had been used in. And it managed to communicate with all the other components of itself, because we saw within Terminator 2 that even when it was in little blobs, it would start to come back together because it could communicate with itself. So this comet trail had reignited the T-1000. However, it was embedded within all these items. Thus, everything comes to life, turns against mankind, maximum overdrive. There you go. It's the third best Terminator film. Boom. I feel quite proud of myself for that one. So moving on to Cronenberg's The Fly. Now, this is another film that shows that whenever people say, oh, you shouldn't remake films, why remake films? Why remake a good film? This is why. The original Fly, I've got a lot of love for. It's a great little B-movie, and it works great, and it's got that great image of the final moment of the human fly in the web, like with the spider coming on, help me, help me. But Cronenberg took a whole different approach by using Jeff Goldblum as Seth Brundle, who, after an accident with a teleportation device that he'd been creating and working on, slowly starts to morph into Brundlefly. And it's body horror. It's what Cronenberg does best. The effects work is gruesome and brilliant, and it's just a perfect example of a remake that deserves to exist. This, similar to The Thing a few years earlier, was a film that took a B movie and gave it a whole new approach and a whole new life and gave it a whole new image. Marvellous film. Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, is a sequel that takes the idea of the first film and carries it forward. The spirits that haunted Carol Ann have now followed the family, with the spirit of the Reverend Henry Kane drawn to her light. The film wasn't very well received by critics, but I've always had a bit of a fondness for this and felt that it took the tale off in a solid direction, and we get to see within The Other Side, and we get to see the true presence of evil. A good sequel. A worthy sequel. Don't go any further after number 2. And Rutger Hauer, who I've already mentioned over the past couple of episodes because he's become quite prominent, he became a menacing hitchhiker this year, terrorising C. Thomas Howell's gym in The Hitcher. Now, this is a film that I rented out on VHS literally as soon as it came out, simply because of the name Rutger Hauer. I'd already got a fascination with Rutger Hauer, and him being involved in this meant that I wanted to watch it, and it's become a firm favourite of the horror genre for me. It's chilling, it's got some genuinely distressing moments. Hauer is on fine form, and I go back and revisit this every few years. There was a remake about 10 years ago. It's not as bad as some people say, but it's not a scratch on Rutger Hauer's original. Okay, before we move on to the next round of films, there's one film that I sadly missed out from the horror selection. It could have fitted into sci-fi, it could fit into the next chapter, which is comedy. And it's only when I came around to editing it this evening that I realised this omission. How I omitted this when I briefly hinted at it on the previous episode. Critters came out this year. Now, I've got a lot of love for Critters. Pretty much all the Critters franchise, despite the fact that it rapidly went downhill after the first film. This tale of the Krites escaping from their prison ship and crashing on Earth and causing mayhem and terror in small-town America, it's another cynical cash grab on the Gremlins franchise. It's another one of those, like, let's take mini demonic creatures and have them doing chaotic things. But it's fun. It succeeds thanks for this whole sense of fun that it has. The filmmakers involved in it seem to be loving what they're doing, and that carries across well into a great little movie series that I picked up on home release and I've gone back to a few times since, and still really have a fondness for this first film. So, why I missed it? Don't know. Maybe the Critters got in and sabotaged my whole notes and I couldn't find it. But there you go. Let's get back to the original recording. Flip it. Let's move away from horror over to the comedies. Crocodile Dundee. Now, this is a film that I loved as a kid. You call that a knife? This is a knife. Yeah, there's loads of little throwaway lines of dialogue. There's a lot of fun being had. But when I revisited this a few years ago, the adult me couldn't quite see what was good about it, and I couldn't grasp why I had such good memories of it. It's a bit of a mess. Paul Hogan plays Aussie stereotype in a film that doesn't really have a story or any drama to it, and it's more just a chance to show a fish out of water tale from both sides. From the start of the film, showing someone who's not Australian in Australia and learning the outback, and then the other side. It's okay, but it's not the beloved treasure that my early memories thought it was. The Three Amigos is another one that doesn't quite hold up. Steve Martin, Chevy Chase and Martin Short, together in a wacky comedy about three actors who are thought to be real heroes and recruited by a village who hire them to protect them against bandits. Again, it's a film that I loved when it was released, and more because I'd started to latch on to Steve Martin, Martin Short and Chevy Chase as comedic actors. But recent years of revisiting have shown it to be pretty charmless, and considering the talent involved, it should have been much better. Now, the next film I need to track down a copy of, and that's One Crazy Summer. I came to this film for Bobcat Goldthwait, and I got introduced to John Cusack as a result. Bobcat Goldthwait, who'd been in Police Academy 2 the previous year, had sat on my radar. I loved his approach, basically. And the film, from my memory, because I haven't seen this for about 2 decades, maybe more, ain't great. But the presence of those two together made for a fun, zany romp that can be enjoyed with a few drinks. John Cusack, like I say, I was introduced to him through this film, and he's someone who I then looked onto. You'll notice a theme over the past couple of episodes. The films have introduced me to different names, and then that name's popped up a few other times. And that's because I was becoming more aware of the filmmaking process. I was becoming fascinated with who's involved, directors, actors, and expecting something from those people, so it would make me seek out more of their work. This was the definitive years for my not just love of watching films, but my passion for the industry. This is all coming to play as I'm in my early teens. The next film, when you think about it carefully, it shouldn't be as beloved as a lot of people have. Rita, Sue and Bob 2. Now this, every time you mention this, particularly in the north of England, you get, oh, we're having a gangbang. And loads of people start to go all misty-eyed as they remember the marvellous film, the jokes, the fun. It's a black comedy about a married man who has a sexual fling with 2 teenage schoolgirls. Let me just make that clear. It's a film about a man who has sex with 2 teenage schoolgirls. And it's hilarity. The film is actually quite good. It's adapted from a stage play. It approaches the subject matter quite flippantly. And when you really think about that subject matter, it's not really something that you would joke about. But the way that it tackles the comedy, and there's some serious drama in there, and it keeps the balance between the two, it does make it a lot better than what the concept suggests. But still, that basic premise is a bit difficult to embrace in this day and age. And anyone who still looks on this film with oh, it's one of the best films ever made. Is it though? Is it though? Flight of the Navigator. We're on to family films now. And Flight of the Navigator is a Disney sci-fi adventure that utilised CGI for the design of the spacecraft that a young boy ends up bonding with and going on adventures. And it's not got much else going for it. It scored well critically and it's embraced by many, but I've never really connected with the film. And I watched it when it came out. There was loads of hype about it everywhere. And I watched it and I just thought, is that it? And I've rewatched it in recent years thinking, well, maybe, go and revisit it. And is that it? I had less expectation when I revisited it, and I still don't quite get the love. Now, I do get the love for the next film, and that's Labyrinth. A 16-year-old Sarah must rescue her baby brother from David Bowie's Goblin King. Jim Henson directs this fantasy tale, packing it with marvellous creations, and Bowie's seductive and magical Jareth with his pants, which are packed with marvellous creations as well. Terry Jones from Python scripted this, and you can tell, because there's that inventive and inspired tale kind of approach. There's an allegory aspect in there, there's nods to coming of age aspects, and there's a very, very huge influence of the Wizard of Oz ingrained, or at least the Oz aesthetic ingrained within it. It's a marvellous fantasy tale. It's immensely memorable. If you've never watched Labyrinth, it is an absolute pleasure to revisit. Karate Kid Part 2 came out this year. Now, this has been given a fresh waft of life in recent years. The sequel to the impactful first film sees Daniel head to Okinawa with Mr. Miyagi, where a group who harbour a grudge against the Miyagi family cause some trouble. It's more of the same, but it's done well. And the recent revival, thanks to Cobra Kai TV series, has helped give the film new life and a new approach. You can approach it from a different aspect. Same as with the first film, you can now approach this second film from a different point of view. And the next season of Cobra Kai will actually bring two characters from this sequel to the show, so we get to find the other side of the tale. Well worth a revisit, and it's going to get revisited just before Cobra Kai Season 3 starts on Netflix next month, so that I can be up to speed once more. Not all Marvel films that have been made are good, we already know that, but we never really realised how bad a Marvel film could be until Howard the Duck came out. This is clearly one of the worst, if not the worst, Marvel film ever made. Howard is a duck, pulled from his life on Duck World to our Earth, where he encounters Bev, played by Leah Thompson, and saves her from some attackers using his martial arts quack fu. Seeking a way back to his world, he uncovers a dark plan by, who cares? Genuinely, who cares? This film's an absolute mess. The comics are a marvellous satire set within the Marvel framework. Adapting them to film was not only a bizarre idea, but it's so woefully done. It doesn't know what it is. It's too dumb and flippant to film to be thought of anything other than a kids' film, but it's got some serious adult tones and some rather risque adult humour at moments, making for an unholy mess of a film that really, it's just car crash from start to finish. It's not even one of those films that is so bad you need to watch it. It's one of those films that's so bad it should never have been released. And the fact that it's had a recent revival simply because we've seen Howard the Duck pop up in little cameos in James Gunn's films does not make this film any worth going to. I still love the comic, and if James Gunn had a chance to bring Howard the Duck to the big screen, I'd be interested. If they brought Howard to the big screen in a way similar to the comic, I'd be interested. This was just a mess. Well done, George Lucas. Your ideas behind this one really paid off. An overlooked film from this year, and it's oft forgotten in amongst all the other Disney films, and that's Basil, the Great Mouse Detective. It's based on the Basil Baker Street books. The story is a Holmes-esque tale of mystery, as Basil is sought to locate a kidnapped toymaker who's linked to his old adversary, Ratigan. This is a solid film. I loved this when it came out, and I've revisited it in recent years, and it's still, I'd say it's one of the best of the 80s Disney films. It's a strong tale, it's fresh, it's original, and it's just got full of joyous life. Well worth being discovered, but very often forgotten. Whenever people list their favourite Disney films, or even just list Disney films in general, very rarely does anyone mention Basil the Great Mouse Detective. I think that's an oversight that people need to correct. Go over to Disney Plus, get it watched. And that pretty much rounds up the year. I know there's a lot of films that I've not covered. There's some that I've watched, some that I've not. But I can't cover everything. I can only cover the ones that really stand out for me for the year. But what I'm going to do is what I always finish with, and that's highlighting those films that I think that I should have watched by this point in my life. So, the films that I've not seen that maybe I should get round to. We've got An American Tail. We've got Children of a Lesser God. We've got Stallone's Cobra. Now, I'm not saying it's a good film. I've heard a lot about it. It's one of those films that I feel that I should have watched because of the kind of film it is. We've got She's Gotta Have It. And we've got Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. They're my 5 for this episode that I've not got round to that I think that I should. Tell me whether I should or not down in the comments. Maybe suggest some other films that maybe I've not mentioned. If I've seen them, I'll let you know what I thought. If I've not seen them, I'll add them to my list. Just general comments. Like, share, subscribe. You know the stuff. I'll see you on the next episode when we'll be looking at the year 1987. Thank you very much.